Hey y'all, coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida. This is GovLove, a podcast about local government, brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, Senior Consultant at Ralph Tellis and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. We'll be talking management in Snowmass Village, Colorado. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. Engaging local government leaders is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government, and your membership helps support this podcast. So go become an ELGL member if you want to see more GovLove. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Greg LeBlanc is the Assistant Town Manager for the Town of Snowmass Village, Colorado, a position he's been in for a little over a year, since March of 2022. Previously, he served as Assistant to the City Manager in Grand Junction, Colorado, for about 5 years, and he's also held positions in Boulder County and Denver, Colorado. With that, Greg, welcome to GovLove. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So our listeners know one of our traditions on the podcast is to do a lightning round to get to know our guest a little better. So my first question for you, what was the first concert that you went to?
Ooh, I had to do some thinking on this, and there may have been, when I was 8 or 10, somewhere in there, a concert with Sugar Ray back in the 90s, but I'm going to chalk it up to Willie Nelson. That was my first concert.
That's a good one. Yeah. Willie Nelson. Awesome. Although Sugar Ray, that's very 90s. I like that too.
It was on a beach too, if that helps.
Yeah. I think either way, that's a good first concert. All right. Then my next line question for you. What book are you currently reading?
I am working through a collection of short stories by Ernest Hemingway, and the exact one that I'm on right now, and it's probably 5 pages long, so it won't be done by the time I have lunch today, but it's The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber.
Cool. What's the collection of Hemingway?
It's literally just a compilation and anthology of all of his short stories. And so it's good for someone like me who pretends they can read, and it keeps my attention for about 15 minutes, and then I can get distracted by something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Short stories you get progress too. Cause like I'm reading like a George R.R. Martin book, and it's like, have I even read this? Like 200 pages in, like, have I done anything? All right. Then my next line question for you, what's the last, movie, TV show that you watched or binged?
Just finished a show called Shrinking, which is on Apple TV Plus, and it's got Harrison Ford and Jason Segel. It was a delight. Yes,
great show. I loved it. I loved it. We watched that one too. That's awesome.
Oh, good.
All right, then my last linear question for you. Where do you go for inspiration?
I am reluctant to try any new social media, so I still go to Instagram for my inspiration. It kind of helps me mental vacation and look at pictures of pretty places and places that aren't here, and it just keeps me going.
That's awesome. Very rare that you get the social media way of getting inspiration, but I can relate to that. I can feel like I learn from a lot of people on social that are in local government or doing cool stuff. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So one thing I always like to ask folks about is their path into local government. So for you, how did you kind of end up in local government, and how'd you end up in your current role?
That's a great question. And I love answering this one, because I'll start by saying my dad was a city manager. And so I grew up kind of knowing the terms, knowing what it takes, not seeing him on Monday evenings because of council meetings. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, I'm going to do any career that takes me in the opposite direction of that. And, I laugh at that too. And pretty much everyone I know laughs at it because I'm here now. But I've got a biology degree, and I was a wildlife biologist for a couple of years before. It was a couple summers that I was in the Four Corners region. It was, 110, and it was just too darn hot. So I thought, I think I'm going to pivot a little bit and find a career that has, air conditioning. And so went back to school, got an MPA, Master's of Public Administration, and wouldn't you know it, I ended up in local government.
Yeah.
It was fate, I'll call it.
Yeah, it's the family business, if you will.
Yeah. Exactly. I do make that joke quite a bit, that I always would say that when he retires, I get the city, because that's how feudalism works. But turns out I did learn this in the MPA. you have to apply and actually be given the job. You don't just, it's not a king and prince kind of situation. Yeah, they don't teach that in high school civics anymore, but yeah, I had to learn that lesson.
Does it just get passed on? Yeah.
It doesn't get passed on, yeah.
So, I mean, there's lots of like sciencey jobs where you could probably be in a nice air conditioned room. What was there something about local government where you're like, I'd be interested in doing more of this?
It's going to sound kind of corny, but I think most folks in these types of roles feel the calling to public service.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to chalk it up. Maybe it's in my DNA. Maybe it's just what I was used to growing up, seeing my dad do it. But there's a satisfaction that comes with working for local governments that you don't really get anywhere else. And not to disparage the firms that I worked for prior to getting into this sector, but there was a lot of oil and gas work. And I will say I'm a staunch environmentalist. And there was this pull between, if I do my job right, the oil rig gets built, there's degradation of the environment. But if I do my job bad, I'm not getting the satisfaction of having done a good job. So I never really felt like it was for me. And then anything that might be, in a lab or very policy heavy, that didn't quite seem for me as well. And so I found that nexus, that balance between where can I have the greatest impact, do the greatest amount of good, and go home feeling good about myself. Yeah. And it just happened to be local government.
Yeah. No, that I'm sure that resonates with a lot of folks listening too. So we're going to talk about, your transition to your current role in Snowmass, but I'm just curious, looking now that you've been a year on the job, was there a role maybe that you had before coming to Snowmass that really helped you prepare, or what role maybe did you that you worked in best helped you prepare for that current job?
Yeah, great question. I'll say sort of a cop-out answer, and it was all the roles I've had in government leading up to this. I pull from all those experiences, but my most previous job in Grand Junction was a wonderful opportunity. So for those who don't know, that in Colorado, most of the population is concentrated on what they call the Front Range. And so that's the Interstate 25 corridor that runs north-south. So everything from Fort Collins, getting Denver, Colorado Springs, the bulk of the population is there. But on what they call the western slopes, so the western half, the mountainous region, there's really the only large city is Grand Junction. And when I say large, it's 65,000. Yeah. There's about 100,000 or 150,000 in the county. And so you get that small town feel with big city problems. And I had a great city manager. He's doing amazing things for that community and gave a lot of opportunity to me. And so it was there that I kind of learned, okay, I can do these things, or, the cause and effect of this is how you tackle this problem. You have these tools available to you to solve those issues in a community. And all of that combined with my time in Boulder County and in Denver got me to where I am today.
Very cool. Yeah, I didn't realize Grand Junction was the biggest city in the mountains. That's really interesting. I knew like most of the population is just in the Front Range there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty small. And then to add to that, it's right on the interstate. It's on I-70, and so it is the only metropolitan area between Salt Lake and Denver. And as a result, it's a huge catchment area. So there's a hospital there. It's fairly large. It's much larger than you would expect for a town that size or a city that size. But it gets everything that doesn't go to Denver or Salt Lake or even Albuquerque. There were a lot of patients that would get life flighted in from the Four Corners region. And folks who are familiar with the area know that that's a solid 8-hour drive from Grand Junction. So to be closest to that hospital really shows it demonstrates the large area that it has to serve. And you'll see a lot of that just in industries that are in the area, for everything from oil and gas to support services to all of that. It acts a lot bigger than it is.
Yeah. Interesting. That's fascinating. Cool. So, can you, for our listeners that maybe have not been through kind of the western part of the state or Snowmass Village in particular, can you tell them a little about Snowmass Village and just give a little sense of kind of the community?
Sure. So Snowmass Village is tied at the hip with Aspen, who most people may have heard of. So it is a town. It encompasses the resort, the Aspen Snowmass Resort, which has 4 mountains. So it's Aspen Mountain, Highlands, Buttermilk, and Snowmass. Snowmass Mountain is the biggest of the 4, and the town basically is the resort. It's everything, the development at the base, it's the residential areas, and then our town limits encompass the entire ski area. So if you were to look on a map, it's massive. Mm-hmm. But you contrast that with, we only have 3,000 residents. And that number gets a little gray. There's an asterisk on it because some people aren't exactly truthful on whether they live here full time year round. And so it could be plus or minus a couple dozen. There's no real way to know, but there is a lot of obvious resort traffic. We see it's somewhere over 1 million people in the winter season. And I'm just going off of kind of transit numbers for how many rides we give, but we see a lot of people. And so the town swells, as most resort communities experience. And we have solid off seasons, which is interesting. So right now the mountain closed last weekend. So it's like a ghost town. There's no one here. We'll pick back up in the summer, but kind of back to more of those summary stats. It's a small town. It's a resort town. It's relatively new. It was founded in the 70s. It started kind of as most communities do start, where it was an area, it grew in population, it got more organized, and then finally it incorporated. So compared to everywhere else I've even lived, this place is only, 50 plus years on the books. So there's a lot of new issues that come with that. Some of the original infrastructure needs to be replaced. It's at end of life now. I can get into that later. And then organization wide, we're about 180 employees. We got 11 departments. Just sort of those summary stats. And one that I did pick out that might be fun for the listeners is our tourism marketing department hands out s'mores every day in the winter season. And it's great. We got these little carts. You show up, starts at 3:30. We've got them all kind of prepared, ready to go. And there's a big gas fire pit that's right by it. So good for the family. But we handed out over 50,000 s'mores this season, which I think I couldn't confirm before we were chatting, but I think it's the most the s'moresiest. Is that what you would say? The s'moresiest season on record.
Yeah. That's a KPI that I want to see, like in dashboards, is like the number of s'mores passed out.
You laugh, but I put that on things. I actually do include that in information that I give out to the community.
That's awesome. I love that. So I mentioned kind of your intro and that you've been on the job about a year. So what are some of the things you're responsible for as assistant town manager in Snowmass?
Yeah, I have a real fun assignment, I'll call it. So I get communications, I get IT, I have the town clerk and the town manager's office. And it's a great crew. They have all kind of been in the area for a while and have varying life experiences, which is great because me being new, there's a lot of head scratching of why do we do it this way? Why is, who is this person in the community? Who do I need to talk to? That staff is totally on it. They get me connected. They are connected themselves. They have all of the history, which also helps that the town is so young. So they may have been here when the town was incorporated, or they might have a family member that was.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for them for that. But the thing that I always tell people is the part of a job description that says other duties as assigned. That's really what I do. I have my projects that the town manager has given me, and I give support to staff as best I can. But there's, I show up every day and there's something new waiting for me. And I think that maybe just, a little side point is the crux of why I like local government, or at least my job, because it keeps me on my toes. There's always a surprise.
It's always something new. That's the beauty of it. Yeah. So, I think this transition into kind of a leadership role is really cool. And I know I've done a few episodes with folks who have in a similar point in their career as you, like being one year in kind of a higher up kind of role within an organization. So I'm just curious, like, how did you prepare to become the assistant town manager? Like, what did you kind of think about and what you wanted to do? And I don't know, your first few months on the job or first year, and then, how did you kind of prepare yourself to take on that role?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think it's a combination of a couple things. So my latter 3 years in Grand Junction, I had a promotion, and it was a funky title. You probably won't see it anywhere else, but it was senior assistant to the city manager.
Yeah,
which
I did see that. I thought I just said lumped him into assistant too, because I wasn't quite sure what that meant.
Yeah, and it was a really flat organization, and it worked for the city manager. But what that move did is it allowed me to have a couple departments have some supervisory capacity, which I hadn't had in this context. I had supervised field crews in previous gigs before, but nothing really formal like when you think of a city and a town. And so that move to senior assistant to allowed me to grow a couple operations within the city. So really built out a robust communications team, and now that the person who succeeded me has taken that and grown it even more, and she's doing a wonderful job. So like that, kind of seeing what it's like to oversee a business operation within an organization, that helped. And then talking to other people that I know in these types of communities. So folks I know in Aspen, folks that I know in other ski resorts, had conversations with them and just prepared myself for what it would be like, because if folks who know that resort communities truly are different. You might even have heard of some areas being called a bubble. This is definitely a bubble.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it doesn't have the normal issues. We still have police still take calls. There's still, potholes in the ground, but the expectation's a little different. So talking with some colleagues kind of helped me be prepared for that. And maybe to a lesser degree, because I was so young, I don't really remember it in this context, but I lived in the ski resort before. And so I just had to prepare myself for, okay, it's going to be 7 months of winter. And listeners should know that at the time of this recording, we got 9 inches of fresh snow, and it's April 21. So,
oh my gosh,
winter's still going here. The unfortunate thing is I can't ski to work anymore because the path has gotten a little patchy, and so I can't. I had to walk in.
Oh no,
which really doesn't feed the stereotype of being able to ski to work, but we're still getting fresh snow. So, stuff like that, I had to remember, okay, we're in the mountains. I'm at about 8,500 feet. Sort of those physical, what it actually takes to physically be here and what that means. So that was a long way to answer your question.
No, that's really interesting though. So I have two questions off of that. So first, is there like a network of like resort communities where like you guys ping each other to be like, are you dealing with this? What are maybe some other ones besides Aspen, I guess, that are kind of on that loop? Yeah.
There's informal and there's formal. So formally, there's an association that the town's a part of that I was aware of just previously, but it's called CAST, the Colorado Association of Ski Towns, which is a little misleading because there are some outside of Colorado towns that are members. So Park City, Jackson Hole, Sun Valley, Idaho. And there's enough of these types of communities that there's enough to talk about. So how are you handling housing? How are you handling transit? How are you handling spring runoff? Or how are you handling pothole, wildlife, all of that kind of stuff? So that's a great resource. And then I have more of the informal network, which is, people I know just in the state, just from being in the business for a couple of years. And Colorado is a great it's a great city manager state. And so those that are in the profession are really tight. There's a good network of, you just pick up the phone, any manager will answer. They'll help you work through problems. They may have been in the community before even, and, can give you some context, or, here's how I handled that when I was there. Or it's maybe different in this resort, but when I was working in this different resort town or different mountain town, even, here's the context that you might need to help solve your problem. So I feel very supported there. And then on top of that, there's a good mix of, I'll say, generational knowledge. So there's folks, I'm on the younger side. There's folks who are kind of in my shoes, and then there's folks who are further on in their career. And then there's folks who have recently retired, but are staying involved. And they're wonderful resources because they'll have 40 years, a whole career worth of information on managing in the state. And you can just call them, take them to coffee, buy them a beer, whatever. And they'll just let you work through some problems. So again, a long answer to your question, but having that both formal and the informal network is great because it helps you tackle any problem you might have.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I love that, there's enough of those communities like Snowmass where like it's useful to probably get together and share kind of, some of the challenges that y'all are working through. What are maybe some of those challenges that are unique to resort communities that like, maybe another small town in the mountains or another small town in a different place that maybe doesn't have to deal with it in the same way?
Yeah, I think I'll answer this two ways. So our problems are not necessarily unique just because we're a mountain town. It might be felt more because we're a mountain town or a resort community. Housing is one of those. So we have workforce that could not afford to live here on free market pricing.
Yeah.
How do I put this? Real estate is so expensive in Snowmass that if we have one sale of a $10+ million home, it changes our base. And normal people, I'll just use that term, regular workforce can't afford a $14 million home.
Yeah.
So they have to figure out, okay, do we live out of the area and commute in? Is there workforce housing available? Which there is, but there's never enough. So there's all these issues that kind of are not unique to an area. Housing is an issue everywhere, but it's made worse by the fact that we are a resort community. So, the cascading effects of if there's no workforce, how do you keep the lifts open? How do we get people to plow the streets? How do we keep the wastewater treatment plant open? Who's working in the restaurants? All of that. I couldn't live here free market either. So
yeah. I imagine the geographic realities of like a mountain town, ski town also like impact that, right? Like you can't just commute in from the next, metropolitan area over because that's probably several hours away. Yeah.
Right. And to that point, this is a whole valley. So Aspen and Snowmass kind of sit at the top, and then there's a couple communities that go down until you hit the interstate. And so it is cheaper. Housing is cheaper as you move down valley, as we call it. But it's still not as attainable as it would be maybe in a different area. And so people have longer commutes if they want to find less expensive or more attainable housing. One thing that does make it better is we have a very, I'll just say, excellent transit system. So there's a regional transit authority, and I'm going to get the term wrong, but it's the most, oh gosh, I forgot what the term is. It's the best rural transit authority in the country. And so there's bus rapid transit, there's all kinds of options, and it moves a lot of people. So there's a lot of access to the resorts through that. So I know for some of my colleagues, they take the bus up every day, and it's super convenient. They have Wi-Fi. Some of the more office type jobs, folks that I work with, they get on the bus, they open their laptop, they crank out some emails, in 45 minutes they're in the office, and it's like they were in the office the whole time. Folks who might have a longer commute, it kind of takes the what if out of it. where if it's a snowstorm, they don't have to deal with icy roads. They just
Yeah.
let the bus handle it. And those things are tanks because, they're super heavy and they roll no matter what. They do slide a little bit when it gets icy, but it's still better than, spinning out in your car.
Mhm.
And then within town, we have our own shuttle service. And that, just maybe a quick aside on that, it allows me to be carless. So I can go anywhere within town on the bus and it's free. So if you're coming here to have fun, you just hop on, bus takes you where you need to go, takes you to the mountain, takes you to the market, takes you to the kind of the commercial areas, and it takes you home, takes you to wherever your lodging is, and it's all free. So we get around some of the issues in that way. And then since we were talking about housing, the town actually has a pretty robust housing system. And so we manage something like 500 units, and that's a combination of rentals and deed restricted for sale properties. So it allows some workforce to actually live here. We master lease some of that, so some of the larger business operations can manage that housing for their employees, and they might be seasonal by nature, so they can come and go as needed. And then it's a good mix of everything from a studio to 3-4 bedroom homes, depending on if you've got a family or if you're single or don't need that much space or whatever. So we try to address it that way. There are nuances. I'm oversimplifying it, but it's still better than nothing. So that's kind of like, I'll just put a bow on that by saying those are the problems that you'd see everywhere, but how we address them here. And then we have some, I'll say, unique to mountain town challenges, one of which you already touched upon, being geography. Snowmass, there's not a flat spot in Snowmass. So I walk to work. I'm lucky enough to do that. And I think my house, it's about a 10-minute walk, depending on, weather. It's 12 minutes if it's snowy. It's a couple 100 feet difference, and I'm only a 10-minute walk away. So like I lose altitude when I cruise into work, and then it's a workout when I go home. But it's great because, it's our wellness program, I guess. So, you can't just build housing like you would anywhere else or build a building like you would anywhere else. That combined with the soils are a little challenging. So Colorado has a ton of shale, which is naturally not stable. And so, you can't just do a normal foundation. A lot of things have to go on piles and literally anchor it to the bedrock. So there's a lot of geotech that goes into it. Causes issues with roads. We just did an overlay on kind of the main thoroughfare in town. And I'm kind of chuckling to myself because there's really only 2 roads in Snowmass. So we overlaid half of the roads in town. And, it's just like an annual thing. There's dirt moves, roads crack, they get beat up in the winter just with all of the traffic. It's a lot of plowing, it's a lot of cars, it's a lot of moisture. And then a lot of our infrastructure is aging because it's original, it's end of life. And, you just don't have that in a lot of other communities. You just don't have the traffic, you don't have the environmental issues, or it's just easier to build in other areas. I constantly contrast it with the community that I came from in Grand Junction, where excellent roads, good road maintenance program, but it just didn't get beat up the same way. So you get, you get extra mileage, no pun intended, on a road project down there because it's flat or, it's just better foundation. So those are, I would say, that's an example of what would be unique to Snowmass. The geography is definitely unique. And that I won't go into, I think I've expressed enough on that, but it's everything from literal physical infrastructure to kind of social. There's less, I'll say, access to services because it's still rural. It might be world-class resort, but it's still rural. So we have a little ski-in, and I say that with jest. It literally is ski-in clinic in town, but the hospital's in Aspen. Schools are in Aspen. A lot of the services are spread out throughout the valley. So, we just don't have space for it here.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah. I never thought about the literal geography and geology, how that would impact kind of the building and the maintenance, but it makes total sense. That's fascinating. So you kind of started to touch on this, but I imagine the work for the town changes a lot throughout the year, and it sounds like I've been places where it's winter and then it's construction season. It sounds like Snowmass might have a little bit of that going on. But I'm curious, like for you, kind of how does the work change, and both for you personally and then maybe the town throughout the year with that seasonality of the ski season and tourism and all that.
Yeah, great question. So there really are just two seasons. There's summer and the winter. Winter being busier of the two, obviously, because you got skiing, people want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
The summer time is growing. Summer is shorter than the winter season and inherently takes different kind of programming. The winter is easy, have snow, will ski kind of thing, but the summer is more of a activation oriented type programming where we do everything from free concerts on Thursdays in the summertime. Pretty much every weekend has an event, and that's everything from a mountain biking race to a yoga festival to food oriented, beer oriented, art oriented events. And that kind of makes the town have some vibrancy. It keeps people coming, it keeps people returning, which I guess is more important than just visiting once. We do want people to come back. And it takes a lot of interface with the lodging community, because it's one thing to put on an event. So the town sponsors all of these special events, but people are coming from out of town. If it's a weekend long event, you need somewhere to stay. And with that, you need restaurants, you need other kinds of services. And so that scope really takes a lot of partnership, because to make it all happen, it can't be just us. It has to, I'm going to use a term here and don't laugh, but it takes a village.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, so that's the summer. It's more hands-on as opposed to the winter. Although it's longer and busier, it's pretty straightforward. The ski company, who's a great partner, they maintain a wonderful natural asset that is the mountain. And we just make sure that people get there. We run transit service, we keep the roads plowed, and make sure everything else is running smoothly. A little easier there. And then something that's new to me is having a solid off season. So when I lived in a ski resort before, it was year round, and there was stuff winter, spring, summer, and fall, which is different than here. The mountain closed on the 15th, and it's like I don't want to say ghost town again, but it's the term that I like to use. There's still, the people who live here are here, but there's no tourists. So it just feels kind of less busy. Some of the restaurants will close until the summer season, that's probably the hardest thing for me to get used to, because I don't know, sometimes it's fun to go try some food, and there's good food in the area. Yeah. But the municipal services don't really stop. So we have some public works projects that are going on, tons of wildlife. The bears are waking up. I think we have 3 that are wandering around now. The elk have come kind of back into the area, and they're waiting for the snow to melt so they can go up on the mountain. There's no difference in my workflow. The town still needs to do, public meetings. Yeah. There's still IT needs. Communications still need to go out. It's just interesting to see how less busy it is, like fewer cars on the road. There's no one in the grocery store. But what I guess the point I'm getting to is that it allows us to kind of breathe and recover, because a lot of the support industries, a lot of our partners, they are just 24/7 throughout the winter and the summer seasons. But these 6 to 8 weeks in the off season, you can take a step back. You can, fix the broken stuff. You can, get ready, take a break, maybe take a vacation even, and then be ready for the next season.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, you kind of touched on this maybe a little bit, but, after being on the job for about a year, is there anything that surprised you about kind of, this role generally, or kind of working in Snowmass specifically, that, looking back on kind of that first year as an assistant town manager?
Aside from the seasonality, I'm genuinely pleased with how nimble the organization is. Despite having about 180 employees, there's not a lot of bench depth within staff. And so if one person goes on vacation or is sick, um, there's no one else often. And people fill in. There's a lot of, I'm going to use the term again, it takes a village, and people really care about their community. So it's less of a, oh no, I'm going to complain because, so-and-so's out of the office. It's, what can I do? How can I help? And that's everyone that's on staff. It's people in the community. There's a good sense of community pride that I think has always been, from what I understand, kind of always been here. And it's actually a priority of councils to maintain that and really try to understand, what is that? It's not just there. It doesn't just happen organic or without any effort. Like there's some organic nature to it that, they really want to understand and maintain. So I've been really surprised at that. And then I've been really surprised at how supportive the community is of the town. And it sounds kind of similar to what I just said, but looking back in previous experiences, I still get my regular amount of angry phone calls.
Yeah.
But it's less of, how do I put this? It's less personal. It's more of a, this is an issue, we should look into this as a community, as opposed to somebody yelling on the phone, you're terrible, I hate you, the typical hate that people get when they work in local government. So I've been enjoying that. And I don't want to say I'm surprised just because this is a wonderful place, but it's been nice to get used to it. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. One, and that culture piece I think is interesting. Like obviously you learn that just working in a place for, some amount of time, you kind of get to know the culture, but I'm curious, it's you said 180 FTEs, you could probably get everybody in a room and meet them all at once if you wanted, but how did you kind of go about getting to know people and like understanding that culture when you were new on kind of the job?
Yeah, great question. Well, one, we did get everybody in a room, and I just went down the line and shook everyone's hand.
Yeah.
I went through department by department and met with each of the directors, kind of, asked what's working well, what's not, what are some things I need to, be aware of so I don't put my foot in my mouth. And then for the operations that are maybe outside of town hall, public works, parks and rec, I just went and looked at things, what does the operation actually look like? Who does what? What do we have? What resources are available? So, for public works, it was literally going down to the shop. What do we have? How many bays do we have for maintaining vehicles? Who are the mechanics? Who does solid waste? Where do we put the solid waste? Is there, different receptacles for recycling or composting? How does it get to the landfill? Where is the landfill? All of those kind of questions that come with it. And so that when I have been solidly in the job, it's less of like, oh, I'm scratching my head. No, I just call, whoever that does the job and, work with them and kind of build that relationship further that way. I like doing that when I start in a job because it allows me to know people's names, and it takes me about 3 to 4 years to actually get the name right because I'm terrible with names. But it opens it up for two-way communication where people come into my office and they're like, last time I saw you, we were talking about this. I had an idea. What do you think about it? And then it's like, okay, let's start that conversation. Let's bring the appropriate people in. Let's see if we can get something done. And, sometimes it goes nowhere. Sometimes we get a really good product, whether it's a policy or a program, but you wouldn't have that opportunity if it was very hierarchical or my door was always closed or, it was very closed off. One thing, and I think it was the city manager where I just came from said, I never want to be the person who goes a tenure in an organization and have never met somebody, or conversely, overhear a conversation where they're talking about you and somebody says, well, I've never met them. It's just not, it's very impersonal. It's not how I want to operate. So I made sure to get out there as best I could. There was a nuance where I had to work remote for a couple months because I was waiting on housing prior to start. And so I couldn't get out as much as I would have liked, but cresting and going past home base and going into year 2, I think I've met most employees now. I definitely wave whenever I see people, so I feel good about that.
That's very cool. Yeah, I love that's a really good point about like wanting to be personal and knowing that about kind of your style, and it probably makes it, or I would imagine if you know that that's what you want to do, like you're not going to go to a place that has a million FTEs, right? Like because you can't manage that way if that's the kind of way you want to manage, right? Like that's interesting. So you mentioned kind of some of your roles doing communications. I imagine communications in a place with such seasonality of, you know, folks coming in and out and tourism, like you can't just focus on talking to residents, must change some of kind of how you approach communications and even engagement. So, you know, what's kind of that approach in Snowmass? I'm just curious because of that kind of seasonality and then and the large tourism kind of swings that you have.
Yeah, it's a challenge. So, I'm used to areas that have a strong media presence. Even Grand Junction had 4 TV news stations, and Denver, obviously, big market. Here we have 2 daily papers and Aspen Public Radio, which is a great resource. I don't want to make it sound like I'm knocking radio, but it's a big difference to go from television news and a daily paper and radio to 2 dailies, and they really focus on other areas. We're kind of tucked up in the hills, and I'll say this because it's a safe space. We're forgotten about. Often we get overshadowed by Aspen because, you know, the brand really is Aspen. You've heard of Aspen. You may have seen even if it's just having seen Dumb and Dumber, people know Aspen, but they don't know Snowmass. And it's true on the local level. People forget we're up here, unless you're a skier.
Yeah. They know John Denver, right? Like
exactly. So, you know, it's not like nobody's knocking on my door saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a story. What are the deets in Snowmass?" You know, I have to push a lot out and pitch a lot more than I'm used to. And so because I don't get to rely on the traditional media, I have to really leverage other tools. And they're really kind of grassroots oriented. So like a lot of newsletters, word of mouth is huge in this community. And so identifying, you know, who are I call them community kingpins. You know, they're the people who know everybody. They're the ones who have been here for a while. You know, they might have some, owned a company, owned a restaurant that everyone loves, you know, that type of person. Leveraging them, you know, make sure they get the good information first so that they can tell their friends, and then their friends can tell their friends. And council's another good example of that, where you give them, here's what's happening, tell everybody, and they get the word out. Social media has been a good resource because, you know, it just takes my time. But trying to get people to know where to look for information has been helpful. And then all of that has the caveat of we have our full-time residents, so the people who live here year round. And then we have those who are vested but don't necessarily live here. So they might be a second homeowner, or they might own a rental property, and they may not physically ever live here, but they have that interest. They have some connection to Snowmass. So we've got this whole other network, and we call them part-time residents. There's even a board. It's a part-time residents advisory board.
Oh, wow.
And that is totally foreign to me. You know, they're non-voting, but they own here. They have some ownership, whether it's literal real estate or they just have that emotional connection to the town. And so I've got to key everything that I give to the residents. You know, rec center's closed, or we're doing some road construction, and I got to repackage that for the part-time residents, because it's like, okay, if you spend 4 weeks total here a year, you'd want to know if you're coming in the summer month and, you know, your road's getting rebuilt, or you know, there's something that might impact you. Or if you're renting out, if I was going to go to a vacation rental and I, you know, couldn't access the home, or at least I wasn't aware that, you know, road was going to be torn up or something, I'd be a little upset. Like, I wish I had known. It's a mild inconvenience, but I wish I had known still. And so I've got to interface with those people. And luckily it's, you know, fairly straightforward. You got a good distribution list. The advisory board really is connected with the part-time residents on HOAs, lodging, all of that. We get the word out, but it's something I've never had to do before, pay attention to the part-time residents, but it's so integral to the resort community that you can't not do it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The like part-time resident, and that being a specific like strategic outreach that like the town needs to do. That's I would have never thought about that either.
Yeah. And then I'll add one more thing to that. We have a huge tourism marketing operation because we got to market the resort. That's how you get people here. And, I handle everything that's kind of, I'll say the internal, those residential folks. And then they have the audience that is everyone not within the town. They're getting the people like where you live. You want to go on a ski vacation, hop on a plane, come to Aspen. You can have a better time in Snowmass. You could ski Aspen if you wanted to, but why don't you come here instead? Better lodging, cheaper food, less crowds. They do all of that. And so there's all these layers of engagement because they bring the people here. I keep them engaged and hopefully they keep coming back.
Very cool. That's awesome. Interesting. So not to switch gears too hard, but since I have you here, you wrote a recent article for ELGL, kind of one of our morning buzz series on the title is "Are We Still Having Fun?" And I think it really resonated with me just because I think anybody that's worked in local government has experienced what you talked about, kind of managing one of those bad days in local government. So maybe I don't know, we don't need to like rehash the whole article, but maybe can you talk about why did you want to write about that topic, and then how do you kind of handle those? Man, it was one of those days.
Well, I'll be honest. I was searching for a topic on this last one. I was coming up blank. Usually I try to do something that's novel for the morning buzz articles. And so I didn't want to do something that I, read and I was going to regurgitate information, or I didn't want to do something so out there that nobody would get it. It would just not really land. And so I was 2 or 3 days before it was due, I was having a meeting with my boss. And earlier that week, we had some staff turnover. And it's like, geez, we got all these projects and it's going to, we're going to lose momentum. And then there were a couple community level projects that had been stalled and halted kind of at the council level, planning commission level. And so the mood in the office was like, well, this is a bummer. We've been doing all this work and, that project's not going, or, one of my staff had trained all these other guys and they took jobs elsewhere. And so it was just like the air had just a bummer attitude.
Yeah.
And so I'm chatting with my boss and he just like turns and he looks out the window and he goes, I'm still going to ski over lunch. And it got me thinking, it's really not that bad. There'll be more projects. We'll hire more people. And I really wanted to dissect, well, how do you get over it without just saying, put on your big boy pants and get over it. So it was a little on the nose in that first paragraph of the examples of why you might have a bad day. But it came from that conversation of things are often not truly dire. Mm-hmm. There's obviously life and death situations that occur. That's part of being alive, but it's okay to be bummed. It's okay to, recognize that you put a lot of work into something and it maybe didn't pan out the way you wanted to, or, you're stressed. You got a lot on your plate. You've got some deadlines that are approaching. It's okay to feel those feelings. Yeah. Most people do. And so it's less of the, how do you get through it, and more of the recognizing when you need to get through it. And so that's what I was trying to address. But, I fully understand that not everyone can just go ski on their lunch break, but finding what that equivalent is, maybe it's going for a walk, maybe it's talking to some colleagues, maybe it's, do something nice for yourself, buy a pizza on the way home. I don't know. Just having that internal dialogue of, okay, this is tough. I need to figure out a way, even if it's a hard battle that's fought. It takes a long time. Maybe it's something that there's not an apparent easy answer. Recognizing that you need to have that conversation is the first step.
Yeah, I like that. And it brought me back to being in a budget office and, going through the grind of budget season and just being like this, this too shall pass. Like, this is the most, I used to joke, like, it's the most wonderful time of year. And do like the Christmas song in June or May or whatever. But
that's funny.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, as we'll be sure to link to that article in kind of the notes for this episode. But so, before we kind of sign off, what's next? What are you working on maybe in Snowmass or that our listeners should look out for?
Sure. A couple things, very municipal in nature. We've got a municipal fiber network that's hopefully going to be finished this year. It was a 1-year project that's now on year 3. So maybe I'll listen to this recording in a year and laugh at myself for thinking it'll get done. So hopefully fiber. Childcare is big for us. We have a facility that's in town that is super critical to the county. We're looking to expand that. So I've got a stack of proposals on my desk that I'm reviewing when we get off the phone here. And then I think my next Morning Buzz comes out in May. So if you don't want to wait for fiber or childcare, you can just read my next ramblings in May.
Yeah, stay tuned. Yeah. So is it a city-run childcare facility, or you guys lease out space? Or
we lease out the space. It used to be run by a nonprofit that was started by the town. That folded. We had a provider that needed space, and it was a good opportunity. So my predecessor, in his wisdom, made that happen. So we're really fortunate to have that. And we're even more fortunate to have the problem that we have more kids than we do space. So the no-brainer is, well, let's just make the space bigger. Yeah. So that's what we're working through now.
Cool. Very cool. Awesome. And so, our last question on GovLove it's usually the hardest, but if you could be the GovLove DJ and pick the exit music for this episode, what song would you pick?
Okay. So this was the hardest question. And I spent way too long laboring over this yesterday, but I was walking into work today and hit shuffle on Spotify, and Weapon of Choice by Fatboy Slim came up, and I thought, you know what? This is it. This is the one I'm going to say. And you all can judge me. You all can make fun of me, but that's it. That's what I'm saying.
Perfect. Yeah. You got to pick what's true to you,
I think it fits.
Yeah. I love that. Awesome. Well, that ends our episode for today. Greg, thank you so much for coming on and talk with me. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Awesome. And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders. And the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. And you can do that by going to elgl.org. You can also find past episodes of GovLove at elgl.org/GovLove. And you can follow us on Twitter at the handle @GovLove Podcast. And you should subscribe to GovLove if you haven't already. We're on all your favorite podcast apps. And then go spread the word. Tell a friend, a colleague about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. And with that, thanks for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.